All right, Python Explorers, welcome to our deep dive into the OpenAI documentation. We know you're about 3 months into your coding journey, and we're here to help you conquer those docs and unlock the power of AI.
Yeah, it's like having a map before you set off on an adventure,
Yep.
right? You wouldn't wander into a dense jungle without knowing the lay of the land, right? Same goes for navigating the OpenAI documentation. We'll help you build that mental roadmap.
Exactly. Think of us as your guides to this exciting world. So first things first, when you crack open those docs, what's the most essential concept to grasp?
Hmm. That would be understanding OpenAI's official libraries. They're basically pre-built tools, specifically designed to simplify your interactions with the OpenAI API. They handle all the complicated behind-the-scenes stuff for you.
Okay, back up for a sec. I know API is a common tech term, but for someone still new to the coding world, could you break it down?
Sure, API stands for Application Programming Interface. Think of it like a waiter at a restaurant. You give the waiter your order, they communicate that to the kitchen, and then bring you back your food. The API is that communication channel between your code and the OpenAI system.
So in this scenario, what are the libraries? Are they like the menu?
Good question. No, the libraries are more like specialized chefs who are experts in specific types of cuisine. Say you order a Python dish. The Python library knows exactly how to translate your request into instructions that the OpenAI system understands.
Uh-huh. Got it. These official libraries are provided by OpenAI themselves, right? What programming languages are covered?
That's right. OpenAI develops and maintains these libraries. They currently offer official support for Python, JavaScript, .NET, Java, and Golang.
Awesome. Our listener here is working with Python, so that's great news for them. So let's get a bit more specific. What kind of tasks do these libraries actually help with?
Imagine you want to send a text prompt to GPT-3, one of OpenAI's powerful language models. The Python library will format your request correctly, send it to the API, receive the response, and even handle streaming data if the response is a large chunk of text.
Wow, that takes care of a lot of the heavy lifting, so I don't have to worry about all the nitty-gritty details of how the communication works.
Exactly. You can focus on the creative part, crafting your prompts and building your application. The libraries handle the technical complexities.
Now, I noticed something in the source material about community libraries. What's the difference between those and the official ones?
Think of community libraries as a vibrant marketplace of tools built by passionate developers around the world. They often offer specialized functionalities or cater to specific programming languages beyond the ones officially supported by OpenAI.
So it's like having a wider selection of tools beyond the standard set, but wouldn't there be potential downsides to using these community libraries?
That's a valid concern. While community libraries offer more options, they aren't officially vetted or maintained by OpenAI, so you need to be cautious. Always double-check the code. Look for updates and make sure the library is actively maintained.
So it's a trade-off between having more options and potentially taking on some extra risk. Makes sense. Are there any notable examples of these community libraries, any that stand out in terms of popularity or functionality?
Absolutely. You've got libraries for languages like C#, C++, plus Clojure Crystal, Dart, Flutter, Delphi. There's a massive and diverse ecosystem out there showcasing the incredible reach of OpenAI and the enthusiasm of the developer community.
That's really impressive. Clojure and Delphi aren't exactly mainstream languages.
Yeah.
It just goes to show how wide the OpenAI community has become. But before we get lost in the library jungle, let's zoom out and talk about where these libraries fit within the larger OpenAI ecosystem.
Right. Remember we talked about the API being that communication channel? Well, the libraries act as a bridge between your code and the API, making the communication smooth and efficient. They take care of all the technical details so you can focus on what you want to achieve with AI.
Okay, that clarifies things if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah.
I write my code using a specific library, and that library acts as my interpreter, speaking both Python or whatever language I'm using, and OpenAI.
Precisely. The library acts as a translator and facilitator, allowing you to interact with the OpenAI system without getting bogged down in the intricacies of API calls.
Got it. So where in the OpenAI documentation can our listener find information about these official and community libraries?
There's a section in the documentation called Libraries, a great resource with links to all the official libraries on GitHub, as well as a curated list of popular community libraries.
So if our listener is ready to start exploring, they can head over to that section and find everything they need.
That's the place to start. It's like browsing a catalog of possibilities. Even just looking at the names of the libraries can spark ideas and get you thinking about what's possible with OpenAI.
This is all fantastic information, but let's get practical. Say our listener is ready to roll up their sleeves and start using OpenAI. What are your top tips for navigating the documentation itself?
First things first, start with the getting started guides. Think of them as a friendly onboarding process. They provide a structured introduction to the OpenAI API and its core concepts.
So these guides are the essential foundation before diving into anything more complex.
Exactly. They walk you through the basics and give you a solid footing, and one of the most valuable things they teach you is how to obtain your API key.
Okay, I've heard about API keys, but what exactly are they and why are they important?
Think of your API key as your unique digital ID card that gives you access to the OpenAI API. It's how OpenAI recognizes you and keeps track of your usage.
So it's like my personal pass to use OpenAI's tools. I wouldn't want to lose that.
You definitely want to keep it safe and confidential. And speaking of safety, the Getting Started guides usually have sections on best practices for security and how to protect your API key.
That makes sense. They wouldn't just hand over the keys to the kingdom without giving you some safety tips. So once I have my API key, what's the next step in the Getting Started guides?
They usually walk you through making your very first API call. It's like a hello world moment in the world of OpenAI where you send a simple text prompt to one of the models and get a response back.
Ah, so I get to see the magic in action right away. They probably provide some code examples that I can copy and paste, right?
Exactly. You can try those out, see how they work, and start experimenting with different prompts. It's a great way to get a feel for how the API works and what's possible.
I'm all for learning by doing so. Once I've gone through the Getting Started guides and sent my first API call, where should I go next in the documentation?
That's where it gets exciting. You've got this vast world of AI capabilities to explore, from natural language processing to image generation, code completion, and so much more. The OpenAI documentation is structured to let you delve deeper into specific areas that interest you.
So it's like choosing your own adventure within the world of AI.
Exactly. You pick a path that aligns with your goals and explore the tools and techniques that are relevant to your project. You'll find lots of practical examples and use cases that can spark your imagination and give you ideas for what to build.
This is all sounding fantastic, but before we go any further, I think we need to take a short break. We've covered a lot of ground already, from official libraries to community libraries, API keys, and Getting Started guides.
We'll be back soon to continue our exploration of the OpenAI documentation, diving even deeper into practical tips and strategies. Welcome back to our deep dive before the break. You were talking about, choosing your own adventure in the OpenAI universe.
Right, we were talking about choosing your own adventure within the OpenAI universe.
Yeah.
So let's say our listener has found a specific area they're interested in, maybe natural language processing or image generation. What's the next step in navigating the documentation?
That's where the API reference section comes in. Think of it as the encyclopedia for the OpenAI API. It provides detailed descriptions of each function, the parameters you can use, and the expected output.
Okay, so it's like the comprehensive guidebook to all the tools and features available in OpenAI's toolbox.
Exactly. Let's say you're fascinated by GPT-3 and its ability to generate human-like text. The API reference section for GPT-3 will tell you everything you need to know about how to interact with it.
So if I want to use GPT-3 to create different creative writing prompts, I'd find that information in the API reference.
Precisely. You'd look up the specific functions related to text generation, understand the parameters you can tweak, like the length of the output, the temperature, which controls the randomness, and so on.
Wow, that level of control is impressive.
Yeah.
It's like having a set of dials and knobs to fine-tune the output of the AI. But I have to admit, just thinking about an API reference sounds a bit intimidating. Any tips for tackling this section of the documentation?
Don't be put off by the name. Remember, even the most complex tools can be broken down into smaller, manageable parts. Start by identifying the specific functions you need for your project.
So if I'm building a chatbot, I'd focus on the functions related to conversational AI and text generation.
Right. Once you've found the relevant functions, take your time to understand their parameters and the different options available. Experiment with code examples, tweak the parameters, and see how the output changes.
It's all about hands-on exploration. I like that approach. It's much more engaging than just passively reading through technical descriptions.
Absolutely. And as you get more familiar with the API reference, you'll start to see patterns and connections between different functions. You'll develop a deeper understanding of how the OpenAI system works as a whole.
Speaking of deeper understanding, the OpenAI docs are known for being pretty technical. Any tips for navigating those more challenging parts?
Don't be afraid to revisit sections multiple times. Sometimes concepts click into place after you've had some practical experience. Another tip is to break down complex tasks into smaller steps.
So if I'm working on a project that involves multiple API calls, I shouldn't try to tackle the whole thing at once. I should break it down into smaller, manageable chunks.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of taking breaks. If you find yourself getting stuck, Step away from the documentation for a while, come back with fresh eyes, and you might find the solution becomes clearer.
That's great advice. I often find that taking a step back helps me see things from a different perspective. And of course, if you're really struggling, don't hesitate to ask for help.
Absolutely. The OpenAI community is incredibly supportive and helpful. There are forums, online communities, and even dedicated Discord servers where you can connect with other developers, ask questions, and share your experiences.
It's like having a network of fellow explorers to help you navigate the OpenAI jungle. So don't be shy about reaching out and asking for guidance. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on another aspect of the OpenAI documentation that I found particularly valuable.
Okay, what's that?
The documentation doesn't just focus on the technical details. It also includes sections dedicated to best practices and real-world examples. It's like having a mentor guiding you along the way.
You're right. Those sections are incredibly helpful, especially for beginners. They provide context, showcase different use cases, and demonstrate how to apply the API in practical scenarios.
For example, I remember seeing a section on how to use GPT-3 for language translation, complete with code examples and tips on optimizing the process. It was fascinating to see how the same API could be used for such a wide range of applications.
Exactly. It highlights the versatility of the OpenAI platform. It's not just a collection of individual tools. It's an interconnected ecosystem that can be adapted to various tasks and workflows.
Okay, so we've talked about API references, breaking down complex tasks, seeking help from the community, and exploring real-world examples. Is there anything else we should highlight when it comes to navigating the OpenAI documentation effectively?
One last tip. Don't be afraid to experiment and get creative. The OpenAI documentation provides the building blocks, but it's up to you to explore the possibilities and discover new ways to apply these powerful tools.
That's a great point. It's like having a set of Lego bricks and the instructions to build a basic model. But the real fun starts when you start experimenting and building your own unique creations.
Exactly. The OpenAI documentation provides the foundation, but the true potential lies in your imagination and willingness to push the boundaries.
I love that. So for our listener who's eager to dive into the world of OpenAI, remember that the documentation is your guide, your mentor, and your toolbox. It might seem daunting at first, but with a bit of patience, curiosity, and a willingness to experiment, you can unlock the incredible power of AI.
And remember, the journey of exploring the OpenAI documentation is an ongoing process of learning and discovery. The more you explore, the more you'll realize just how vast and transformative this technology can be.
This has been a fascinating deep dive into the OpenAI documentation. I feel like we've equipped our listener with a solid understanding of the key concepts and strategies they need to navigate the docs with confidence.
I agree. We've covered a lot of ground from understanding the role of libraries to demystifying the API reference and emphasize the importance of experimentation and community support.
Before we wrap up completely, I think it's worth highlighting one more aspect of the OpenAI documentation, something that's particularly relevant in the context of AI.
Sounds intriguing. What is it?
It's the emphasis on safety guidelines and responsible use as you delve deeper into the world of AI. It's crucial to be mindful of the ethical implications and potential risks.
Yeah, that's a vital point. OpenAI has integrated those considerations directly into their documentation, providing guidelines on topics like data privacy, bias detection, and mitigating potential harms.
So it's not just about teaching you how to use the tools, but also how to use them responsibly and ethically.
Precisely, you'll find sections that encourage developers to think critically about the impact of their AI applications and to prioritize safety and fairness throughout the development process.
I remember seeing a section on how to avoid creating biased AI models, which is incredibly important. It's a reminder that AI systems can inherit and amplify existing biases if we're not careful.
Right. OpenAI provides guidance on recognizing potential sources of bias in your data and training processes, as well as strategies for mitigating those biases.
That's really impressive. It shows that they're taking the ethical considerations seriously and empowering developers to build responsible AI systems.
Absolutely. OpenAI recognizes that the power of AI comes with a responsibility to use it wisely and thoughtfully, and their documentation reflects that commitment.
So for our listener who's just starting their OpenAI journey, what's the key takeaway here?
I would say embrace the incredible potential of OpenAI's tools, but always keep in mind the importance of ethical development and responsible use. The documentation is there to guide you not just technically, but also ethically.
It's a great reminder that building AI isn't just about writing code. It's about creating systems that benefit society and align with our values. Well, I think we've covered an incredible amount of ground in this deep dive. We've demystified the OpenAI documentation, explored everything from libraries and APIs to API references and real-world examples, and even touched on the crucial aspect of responsible AI development.
Yeah, we've given our listener a solid foundation and hopefully instilled in them the confidence to explore the OpenAI documentation and embark on their own AI adventures.
Exactly. And remember, the OpenAI documentation is a constantly evolving resource. As OpenAI releases new models and features, the documentation will be updated to reflect those changes.
So it's a journey of continuous learning and discovery.
I love that as we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with one final thought. Now that you have a better understanding of how to navigate the OpenAI documentation, what amazing AI-powered applications will you create out? The possibilities are truly endless.
And remember, as you explore those possibilities, do so responsibly and ethically, using your newfound knowledge to build a better future with AI.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the OpenAI documentation. We hope you found it insightful and empowering. Happy coding, and see you next time on the deep dive. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're tackling something that, can be a bit intimidating, especially when you're just starting out with Python. How do you navigate technical documentation? We're diving deep into the OpenAI API documentation. So if you've got, I don't know, like maybe 3 months of Python under your belt and you're kind of looking to unlock the power of OpenAI, you're in the right place.
That's right. We're going to build kind of a mental roadmap together before you even open the docs. It's almost like having a guide, through a dense forest, only instead of trees, we've got technical terms and API endpoints.
I love that analogy. Okay, so for this deep dive, we're focusing on a document called 50 Your Data OpenAI API.pdf. This one is all about how OpenAI handles the data that you send through their API, which is a pretty big deal when you're building these AI-powered applications.
Absolutely. And you'll be happy to know that as of March 1st, 2023, OpenAI made a significant change to their data usage policies. They no longer use the data that you send via the API to train their models unless you specifically opt in.
Wait, really? So all that code I'm writing, testing, OpenAI isn't using that to make their models smarter? Unless I give them the thumbs up.
That's exactly right. It's a huge win for user privacy and control. Think of it as like a power shift towards the users. You're now in the driver's seat when it comes to how your data is used.
That's amazing. Okay, that makes me feel a lot more comfortable about, experimenting with the API. But I'm guessing there are some exceptions, right? I mean, nothing's ever that simple.
Well, there are some nuances, right? OpenAI retains API data for up to 30 days for security purposes, mainly to identify and prevent, any abuse of the platform. So it's kind of a balancing act between keeping things secure and respecting your privacy. After that 30-day window, though, it's gone, unless there's a legal obligation to keep it.
Okay, that makes sense. So my data is used to keep the platform safe, but isn't being fed to some giant AI training machine without my permission. Okay, what about this zero data retention thing I saw in the document? What is that all about?
Yeah, zero data retention is kind of like sending a message with disappearing ink. Your data is only held in memory long enough to process your request, and it's never logged or stored anywhere. It's like the ultimate level of data privacy.
Wow. Okay, that's impressive. So if I'm working with, super sensitive information, that's the option I should go for.
It depends. Zero data retention is typically reserved for, trusted customers with very specific use cases where data sensitivity is paramount. Think medical records, financial transactions, top secret stuff. It's not the default setting, but it's a valuable option to, be aware of.
Got it. It's like the VIP section of data privacy.
Right.
Okay, so before we move on, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're actually talking about here.
Yeah.
This whole data policy thing is specifically for the OpenAI API,
Okay.
right? Not for those cool consumer tools like ChatGPT or Daily.
Precisely. It's a common misconception. Consumer platforms, like ChatGPT and developer-focused APIs, they often have different data handling practices. Always double-check the specific terms of service for the tools that you're using.
Good point. It's like assuming the rules of the road are the same for, I don't know, cars and spaceships. All right, now for the part that makes my head spin a little, the chart in this document. It breaks down data usage for each API endpoint, and it's a lot to take in.
Don't worry, we're going to break it down step by step. It's not as scary as it looks. Imagine it as a menu at a restaurant. Only instead of dishes, we've got API endpoints, and instead of prices, we've got data retention policies.
Okay, I can handle that. So what's the first dish on this data policy menu?
Let's start with /v1/chat/completions. It's one of the most popular endpoints, especially for beginners. It's how you get responses from those amazing chat-based models like ChatGPT.
So when I'm using ChatGPT and it's telling me a joke or writing me a poem, it's using that endpoint. That's pretty cool.
Exactly. Now, according to the chart, data sent through /v1/chat/completions is not used for training, which we already know is the general rule now. The default retention policy is 30 days. But here's the interesting part. Zero data retention, IS, possible in most cases.
Most cases. What are the exceptions? I mean, are there certain topics the AI won't talk about unless it can store my data?
Not quite. The document highlights three specific situations where zero data retention isn't an option. The first is if you're sending image inputs through this endpoint. The second is if you're using what are called schemas for structured outputs. And the third is if you're working with audio outputs.
Okay. Why would those be treated differently? Are they more likely to contain, like, personal information or something?
It likely boils down to the fact that images, schemas, and audio can potentially contain more sensitive information compared to just plain text. So OpenAI might need to hold on to that data a bit longer, for security or moderation purposes.
Okay, that makes sense. They're being extra cautious with data that could be more revealing. So what's next on the data policy menu?
Let's move on to /v1/assistance. This endpoint is becoming increasingly popular for building more complex and interactive AI applications.
Assistance. Like a virtual helper that can, do tasks for me.
Exactly. Think of it as building a chatbot that can do more than just chat, right? It can access and process information, make decisions, and even interact with other systems.
That sounds incredibly powerful. What does the data policy say about this endpoint?
Well, /v1/assistance, along with several related endpoints like /v1/threads, /v1/threads, /v1/messages, and /v1/threads/runs, they follow a similar pattern. No data used for training, 30-day default retention, but zero data retention is not an option.
Interesting. So it seems like OpenAI is taking a slightly more cautious approach with the data associated with these more advanced features.
Yeah, it could be due to the complexity and potential sensitivity of the data involved in, those features. Remember, we're talking about AI systems that can potentially access and manipulate a lot of information.
Right. The more powerful the tool, the more careful you have to be with how you use it and how the data is handled. Okay, let's keep going down this menu. What other endpoints should we be aware of?
Let's look at the ones that deal with images. /v1/images/generations /v1/images/edits and /v1/images/variations. These are all about creating and manipulating images using AI.
So if I wanted to generate a picture of a cat wearing a hat, I'd use one of these endpoints.
You got it. And as you might expect, none of these image-related endpoints are used for training. They all have a 30-day default retention period, and none of them offer zero data retention.
Okay, so no disappearing ink for images. I guess those can contain a lot of personal information too, depending on, what they are. What's next?
Let's move on to /v1/embeddings. This one stands out because it's the only endpoint on this list where zero data retention is an option.
Hold on. Embeddings. That sounds a little complex. What exactly are those?
Embeddings are a way of representing words and concepts as numbers. Imagine turning words into like a secret code that the AI can understand. It's a key technique in many natural language processing tasks.
So it's like translating English into AI language.
Exactly. And because these embeddings are just numbers, they don't necessarily contain the same level of potentially sensitive information as, raw text or images. That's probably why OpenAI is more flexible with the zero data retention option for this endpoint.
Okay, starting to make sense. We've got endpoints for chat, assistance, images, embeddings. What's left?
Let's tackle the audio endpoints. /v1/audio/transcriptions and /v1/audio/translations.
So if I wanted to convert a speech recording into text or translate it to another language, that's where I'd go.
You got it. And here's the really interesting part. Both of these audio endpoints have zero data retention as the default setting. It means your audio data is processed and then immediately forgotten.
Wow. Okay, that's impressive. It seems like OpenAI is taking extra precautions when it comes to handling audio data. Why is that?
Well, audio often contains highly sensitive information like conversations or personal details. It's like having someone eavesdropping on your private conversations, so OpenAI is going the extra mile to protect your privacy.
That makes sense. Zero data retention by default for audio. It's a good thing to know. What about the other endpoints? We've got to be getting close to the end of the menu now.
We're almost there. We've got a few more to cover, and they each have their own quirks.
Okay, hit me with them. Let's finish strong.
All right, let's talk about /v1/audio/speech. This endpoint is all about converting text to speech so you can, like, have your AI actually talk to you.
Oh, that's the one that makes my phone read my emails to
Yeah.
me, right? I love that feature.
Exactly. And like the other audio endpoints we discussed, this one also allows for zero data retention. OpenAI is definitely taking, data privacy seriously when it comes to audio.
It's like they understand that our voices contain some of our most personal information. Good on them. Okay, what else is on the menu?
Next up, we have /v1/files, /v1/fine_tuning/jobs, and /v1/batches. These are a bit different from the others because they're designed for more specialized tasks.
Specialize how? Do I need like a PhD in AI to use these?
Not necessarily. /v1/files is used for managing files that you upload to OpenAI, like datasets for training or text documents for processing. /v1/fine_tuning/jobs is for fine-tuning existing models to perform specific tasks based on your own data. And /v1/batches is for submitting multiple requests to the API at once.
So these are for like the power users, the ones who are, really digging deep into the AI toolbox.
Exactly. And because these endpoints involve more complex data management, their retention policies are a bit different. Data sent through /v1/files is retained until you manually delete it, either through the API or the OpenAI dashboard. Data for /v1/fine_tuning/jobs and /v1/batches is kept until you delete it. And none of these endpoints offer zero data retention.
That makes sense. If I'm uploading a whole data set to train a model, OpenAI is probably going to need to hang on to that for a while.
Right. It would be like asking a chef to prepare a meal, but then taking away all the ingredients before they're finished cooking.
Okay. I'm getting hungry now. But let's focus. We've covered audio files, fine-tuning, batches. What's next?
We're down to our last two endpoints, /v1/moderations and /v1/completions. /v1/moderations is pretty straightforward. It's used to check whether text content violates OpenAI's usage policies like, hate speech or violence.
So it's like a safety net to make sure the AI isn't generating anything, harmful or offensive.
Exactly. And to ensure privacy, this endpoint defaults to zero data retention. Your potentially sensitive content is analyzed and then instantly forgotten.
That makes me feel better about using it. What about /v1/completions? I feel like we've talked about completions before. Is this something different?
Good catch. /v1/completions is actually the older version of the /v1/chat/completions endpoint we discussed earlier. It's still available, but /v1/chat/completions is the more, modern and versatile option.
Ah, so it's like the classic version of the hit song, right? Still good, but the new one is even better.
Perfect analogy. /v1/completions offers the standard 30-day retention with the possibility of zero retention, just like its newer counterpart.
Okay. I think I've got a pretty good handle on the endpoint data policies now. We've been through the whole menu. But the document also mentions, some quirks and exceptions. I'm a little worried about missing those details.
Don't worry, we've got you covered. Let's take a look at some of these finer points. For starters, remember how we said that /v1/chat/completions generally allows for zero data retention? Well, there are a few exceptions.
Okay, here we go. Exceptions. I'm ready.
If you're using image inputs with certain powerful image-capable models like GPT-4 Vision Preview or GPT-4, zero data retention isn't an option.
So those high-tech image models have their own set of rules.
Right. And it's the same story with audio outputs from chat completions. Those are stored for 1 hour to enable those, back and forth multi-turn conversations we all love. Zero data retention isn't possible there either.
Okay, so images and audio outputs have special considerations. Makes sense. Are there any other exceptions we should be aware of?
A couple more. When you're using what are called structured outputs with the API, you might provide a schema to define how your output data should be organized. Those schemas aren't eligible for zero data retention either.
Schemas. They sound kind of technical. Can you break that down for me?
Think of a schema as like a blueprint that tells the AI how to structure its response. For example, if you want the AI to give you data in a table format, you'd provide a schema that defines the columns and rows of the table.
So it's like giving the AI a template to work with. Okay, why can't those schemas be handled with zero data retention?
It's likely because those schemas themselves might contain sensitive information or details about your application that OpenAI needs to keep for a while.
Okay, I see. It's about striking that balance between giving users control over their data and, ensuring that the platform can function properly. What's the last exception?
This one is important. It's about stored completions. There's an option to store the responses you get back from the API by setting the store parameter to true in your request.
So if I need to access a response later, I can, choose to store it? That sounds pretty handy.
It can be, but here's the catch. Those stored completions are kept for 30 days, and they're stored unfiltered.
Unfiltered, what does that mean? Like there's no spell check?
No. It means that whatever you send in your prompt and receive back in the completion is stored as is. So the document urges caution if you're working with sensitive data, because choosing to store those completions means that data will be kept on OpenAI's servers for 30 days.
So it's like saving a draft of a sensitive email. You've got to be careful about what you're storing.
Exactly. It's all about being a responsible developer and taking data privacy seriously. Okay, we made it through the chart and all its exceptions. But I have to admit, there's one part of this document that really threw me for a loop.
Ooh, a mystery. I love a good mystery. Lay it on me.
It's the part about the assistance API and valuations. Instead of giving us like a clear breakdown of data handling, the document simply says, for details, see our API data usage policies. It's like a cliffhanger ending.
It's like they're saying, we'll tell you the rest of the story, but you have to go find it yourself.
Exactly. So for anyone venturing into the realm of the assistance API, your mission is to, seek out those specific data usage policies and decode them.
Challenge accepted. But where do we even start? Is this like a scavenger hunt through the OpenAI documentation?
Well, the document does mention API data usage policies. That's your first clue. It's probably a good idea to start there and see what you can find.
Okay. So we're on a side quest now. We've got to dig deeper and uncover the secrets of the assistance API data policies. What should we be looking for specifically?
I'd say focus on a few key things. First, look for any mentions of data retention policies specific to the Assistance API. Is there a default retention period? Are there any exceptions? Can you opt for zero data retention?
Got it. So retention policies are top priority. What else should we be on the lookout for?
Next, try to find information about what specific data is collected and stored when you use the Assistance API. Do they track things like, the prompts you use, the responses you get, or any other details about your interaction with the API?
Right. Knowing exactly what they're collecting is important. It's like reading the fine print before you sign a contract. Anything else?
I'd also suggest digging into how OpenAI uses the data collected from the Assistance API. Is it used for anything besides, abuse prevention? Do they aggregate it for research purposes? Understanding how your data might be used can help you assess any potential risks.
Okay, so far we've got retention policies, data collection specifics, and potential data uses. It's like a detective case.
Exactly. And remember, the more you understand about how your data is handled, the better equipped you are to use the OpenAI API, responsibly and confidently.
And don't forget, this is especially important for those of you working with sensitive data. You don't want to accidentally expose any confidential information.
Right. If you're dealing with personally identifiable information, health records, financial data, or anything else that requires a high level of privacy, those details about data usage are critical.
This all ties back to what we discussed earlier about understanding the differences between consumer platforms like ChatGPT and the OpenAI API.
Absolutely. Different rules apply, so always, do your research. Don't just assume the same data policies apply across the board.
All right, so we've sent our listeners on a mission to conquer the Assistance API data policies. What about those mysterious evaluations? Where can we find more information about how those handle data?
The same advice applies. The API data usage policies section mentioned in the document is your starting point.
Okay, so once again, we're diving into the data usage policies. But what should we be looking for this time? Is it similar to what we discussed for the Assistance API?
Absolutely. The same key questions apply. What's the data retention policy for evaluations? What specific data is collected and stored? How does OpenAI use that data?
But there's got to be something unique about evaluations, right? Why else would the document give them their own, cryptic little note?
That's a good question. I suspect it has to do with the nature of evaluations themselves. If you're not familiar, evaluations are essentially a way to measure the performance of your models or prompts.
So instead of just relying on my gut feeling, I can use evaluations to get like a more objective assessment of how well my AI is doing.
Exactly. It's like grading your AI's homework, and that grading process might involve collecting and storing some interesting data.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, think about it. To evaluate a model's performance, OpenAI might need to collect data about the model's responses to specific prompts, the accuracy of those responses, and maybe even some feedback from human reviewers.
Ah. So the data collected for evaluations might be a bit more nuanced and detailed compared to other API endpoints. Maybe that's why they're being a bit secretive about it.
It's possible. But remember, the API data usage policies section is your friend. Head over there and see what you can find.
All right. We've sent our listeners on 2 side quests now, one for assistance and one for evaluations. It's like we're playing a role-playing game in the OpenAI universe.
I like that. And just like in any good RPG, the journey is just as important as the destination.
Speaking of journeys, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the basics of OpenAI data policies to those more mysterious aspects of the Assistance API and evaluations. But there's one more crucial piece of the puzzle we need to discuss before we wrap things up.
You're talking about the objects related to the Assistance API section, right? It's tucked away towards the end of the document, but it's packed with important information.
You know me too well. Let's dive in and see what it reveals about how OpenAI handles the data associated with assistance.
Sounds good. This section focuses on the life cycle of these objects, which are essentially the building blocks of your assistance. Think of them as the tools and resources that help your assistant function.
Okay, so we're talking about the things that make your assistant tick. What kind of objects are we talking about specifically?
Well, the document gives a few examples. It mentions objects related to threads, messages, runs, and files. These are all key components of the Assistance API.
Got it. So these objects are like the gears and levers that power your assistant behind the scenes. What does the document say about how they're handled?
It lays out a clear timeline for how long these objects are kept on OpenAI servers. The key takeaway is that most objects are automatically deleted 30 days after you delete them, either through the API or through the OpenAI dashboard.
That's reassuring to know. It means you have control over, how long that data is retained. But what about objects that aren't manually deleted?
That's where things get a bit interesting. The document states that any objects that aren't deleted through the API or the dashboard are retained indefinitely.
Indefinitely. That sounds like a long time. Why would OpenAI hold on to that data for so long?
It's not explicitly stated, but it's likely related to providing ongoing support and functionality for, your assistants. Remember, these objects contain the instructions and resources that define how your assistant behaves.
So by keeping those objects around, OpenAI can ensure that my assistant continues to function properly, even if I haven't interacted with it for a while.
Exactly. It's like having a backup copy of your assistant's brain just in case something goes wrong.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's still important for developers to be aware of this indefinite retention policy, right?
Absolutely. If you're working with sensitive data or have strict data retention requirements, it's crucial to have a plan for managing those assistant objects.
So don't just set up your assistant and forget about it. Be mindful of the data it's using and make sure to delete any objects you no longer need.
Exactly. Take control of your data destiny.
This whole deep dive into OpenAI's data usage policies has been quite the adventure. We've uncovered a lot of valuable information, but I have a feeling we've only scratched the surface.
I agree. The OpenAI documentation is vast and constantly evolving. There's always more to learn and explore.
But we're running out of time for today. Before we go, let's take a moment to recap the key takeaways from this deep dive.
Sounds good. First and foremost, we learned that as of March 1st, 2023, OpenAI no longer uses data sent through the API for training unless you specifically opt in. That's a big win for data privacy.
Right. We also learned that there's a default 30-day retention policy for most API data, but there are exceptions and, nuances to be aware of.
Exactly. And we uncovered those cryptic notes about the Assistance API and evaluations, which led us to the conclusion that there's always more to explore in the documentation.
This deep dive has been like a choose-your-own-adventure through the OpenAI docs. We've given our listeners the map and compass. Now it's up to them to chart their own course.
And remember, the OpenAI community is there to help if you get lost along the way.
Well, folks, we've reached the end of our journey through the OpenAI data usage policies. It's been a wild ride, but hopefully you're feeling a lot more confident about navigating those docs now.
Remember, knowledge is power. And when it comes to AI, understanding how your data is being used is more important than ever.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the OpenAI documentation. We'll be back soon with another exciting adventure into the world of AI and data. Until then, happy coding. Welcome back, everyone. We've journeyed through, the main trails of OpenAI's data policies, uncovering how different API endpoints handle your data. But like any good explorer, we know there are hidden paths to discover. Remember those mysterious evaluations we touched on earlier?
Ah, yes, the evaluations. They're a bit like taking your AI creations to a judging panel. You get a scorecard on their performance, but, it raises the question, what happens to the data used in those evaluations?
That's a great way to put it. It's like submitting your code to, I don't know, a hackathon. You want feedback, but you also want to make sure your intellectual property is protected.
Precisely. And that's where the evaluation data section of the document comes in. It's tucked away almost like a secret annex, but it holds crucial insights into how OpenAI manages this, sensitive data.
Okay, lead the way. What does this secret annex reveal?
It turns out OpenAI applies a similar approach to evaluation data as they do with, other API data. When you create an evaluation, the data associated with it is deleted from their servers 30 days after you delete it through the dashboard. You're in control.
That's good to hear. It means I'm not leaving a permanent trail of my, AI experiments just lying around. Or what if I forget to delete the evaluation data from the dashboard?
That's where it gets a bit hazy again. The document states any evaluation data not deleted through the dashboard is retained indefinitely.
Indefinitely. It's like, those dusty boxes in the attic? They're up there, but you're not quite sure what's inside, or if you'll ever need them again.
Perfect analogy. Well, the document doesn't, spell it out. It's likely this indefinite retention is for legitimate purposes, such as ongoing research and development, improving evaluation processes, or, providing better support to developers.
So it's not just about hoarding data, right? They're using it to make the AI ecosystem, better for everyone.
Precisely. Think of it as contributing to the collective knowledge of the AI community.
Okay. I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. What's the bottom line for our listeners when it comes to evaluation data?
Be deliberate. Be aware. Know that you have control over your evaluation data for 30 days. If you need it longer, that's fine, but understand OpenAI might retain it indefinitely. And if you're done with it, delete it from the dashboard for peace of mind.
Great advice. This whole deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We started with the basics of, data retention and ended up exploring the nuances of assistance, evaluations, and the objects that, power them.
We've been on quite the adventure through the OpenAI documentation. And the best part is, we've equipped our listeners with the knowledge and confidence to continue exploring on their own.
Exactly. You don't need to be a seasoned AI expert to understand these policies. With a little curiosity and a willingness to dig a little deeper, anyone can unlock the secrets of the OpenAI documentation.
And remember, the OpenAI community is a valuable resource. Don't hesitate to ask questions, share your experiences and learn from others on this exciting journey.
That's a great reminder. We're all in this together, learning and building the future of AI. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We hope you found it valuable and empowering.
Until next time, happy coding.
Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. And this time, we're going to be tackling the OpenAI documentation.
Oh, nice.
It can feel a bit like we're exploring a jungle out there, especially if you've got 3 months of Python experience under your belt, which is where we're kind of imagining our listener is right
now.
Yeah. But no worries. We're here to be your guides, so we're going to give you a compass and highlight the must-see spots before you venture in.
Exactly. And I think having that mental map before you really dive deep into those docs is crucial,
Right.
especially when you're trying to grasp a concept that is really fundamental for any developer, and that's rate limits.
Rate limits. Okay, so picture this. You've poured your heart and soul into building this amazing app
Yeah.
using OpenAI's models, and suddenly it just stops. You've hit this mysterious rate limit.
Right.
What in the world is going on?
So think of rate limits like speed limits on an API highway.
Yeah.
OpenAI has these in place to prevent misuse.
Okay.
Imagine someone's trying to flood the system with a ton of requests.
Right.
Rate limits stop that from happening.
Got it.
They also ensure fair access for everyone, kind of like making sure everyone gets a chance to use the road.
Right.
And importantly, they keep OpenAI's servers running smoothly so they can handle everyone's requests without crashing.
Makes sense keeping things fair and preventing, the API equivalent of a traffic jam.
Right.
But how do these limits actually work?
Yeah.
I've seen mentions of requests per minute, tokens per day, even images per minute. It's a bit much to wrap my head around.
Yeah, it's all about different ways of measuring those speed limits.
Okay.
So some limits are based on the number of requests you send within a certain
Okay.
like requests per minute or per day.
Uh-huh.
Others are tied to the number of tokens you use.
Okay, stop right there, tokens.
Yeah.
Let's break this down for our Python beginner. What exactly is a token in this context?
So imagine tokens as the individual words or punctuation marks that make up a sentence.
Got it.
OpenAI's models process text by breaking it down into these tokens.
Okay.
Think of them like the smallest unit of meaning that the model understands.
Okay.
The cool thing is, one token doesn't necessarily equal one word.
Right.
Sometimes it's a piece of a word or even just punctuation.
So it's not as simple as just counting words in a document.
Yeah.
There's this whole other layer of breaking down the text into these tokens that the model actually works with.
Precisely. And different models use different tokenization schemes, which can impact how many tokens your text uses.
Uh-huh.
And those rate limits we talked about,
Yeah.
they're often based on this token count, so it's super important to understand.
Right. I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But with all these limits, based on different time frames and token counts, how do we keep track?
Right.
Is there a way to avoid getting a speeding ticket on this API highway?
Absolutely. OpenAI provides a dashboard where you can monitor your usage
Okay.
and see your specific rate limits based on your usage tier.
Hold on. Usage tiers.
Yeah.
What does that mean for someone who's just getting started with OpenAI?
Think of it like starting with a learner's permit and then graduating to a full driver's license. So OpenAI has different tiers of access, starting with a free tier that gives you a taste of the platform.
Okay.
As you get more comfortable and your projects become more complex,
Uh,
you automatically level up to higher tiers with, you guessed it, higher rate limits.
okay, that's a relief.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm going to hit a wall as soon as I start experimenting and building more interesting things.
Right.
But let's say, hypothetically speaking,
Yeah.
I do hit a rate limit.
Okay.
Does my app just grind to a halt?
Not necessarily. There's a strategy called exponential backoff, and it's a lifesaver in these situations.
Exponential backoff.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
What's the idea behind it?
So it's a bit like being stuck in traffic. Instead of honking your horn and making things worse,
Yeah.
you wait patiently, gradually increasing the time between retries.
Okay.
So let's say your request fails because you hit a rate limit.
Uh-huh.
With exponential backoff, you try again after a short delay.
Okay.
And then if it fails again, you wait a bit longer, and so on.
So it's a way to be respectful of the server's capacity
Right.
and avoid overwhelming it with repeated requests.
Exactly. It's a smart way to handle rate limits gracefully and increase the chances of your requests going through.
Okay.
And OpenAI even provides code examples for implementing exponential backoff using Python libraries like Tenacity and Backoff,
Oh, wow.
making it even easier to integrate into your projects.
That's really helpful. I can already see how that would be useful in a real-world scenario.
Yeah.
But before we move on, can you give us a bit more detail on how those libraries actually work?
Sure. So imagine you have a block of code that makes a request to the OpenAI API.
Okay.
With libraries like Tenacity or Backoff, you can wrap that code with a function that automatically handles retries with exponential backoff.
Got it.
It's like having a built-in safety net that prevents your code from crashing if you hit a rate limit.
Uh-huh.
You can even customize the retry behavior, like setting the maximum number of retries or the initial delay.
Wow, so it takes care of all the complex retry logic for you. That's fantastic, especially for someone like me who's still relatively new to Python.
Precisely. These libraries make it much easier to handle rate limits without having to write a bunch of custom code.
Yeah.
And speaking of making things easier, have you heard of batching?
Batching.
Yeah.
It sounds vaguely familiar, but I can't quite recall the details.
Okay, so it's all about bundling requests together instead of sending them one by one.
Got it.
Imagine you're sending out invitations to a party.
Yeah.
It's much more efficient to send one big batch of invitations
Right.
than to address and stamp each one individually.
So instead of sending a bunch of separate text messages, it's more like sending one big group text.
Exactly. Batching is particularly useful when you're working with smaller models or when you don't need immediate responses from the API.
Uh-huh.
It allows you to maximize your throughput and reduce the overall number of requests you send,
Right.
which can help you stay within those rate limits.
That makes perfect sense. It's like optimizing your workflow to get the most out of the API. So we've got rate limits to keep things fair and efficient.
Yeah.
We can track them in the dashboard,
Uh-huh.
and we have techniques like exponential backoff and batching to help us work within those limits.
Exactly.
Is there anything else we should keep in mind before we dive into specific examples?
One pro tip, when you're working with the API, pay attention to the max tokens parameter.
Okay.
This parameter allows you to control the maximum length of the response generated by the model
Uh-huh.
by setting it carefully.
Yeah?
You can prevent unexpectedly long responses that could consume a large number of tokens and potentially push you over your rate limits.
So it's like packing your suitcase strategically so you don't go over the weight limit for your flight.
Exactly. It's all about planning and being mindful of the resources you're using.
Right.
By understanding these key concepts and techniques, you'll be well equipped to navigate the OpenAI documentation and start building some amazing things with AI.
I love it. All right. We'll be right back after a short break.
Sounds
All right. That was a lot to take in, but I feel like I'm finally getting a handle on these essential concepts. Now, let's get practical. Imagine our listener wants to build a simple chatbot. Where would they even start in the OpenAI documentation jungle?
So the documentation is structured around specific models. And for a chatbot, I think the GPT models are a great place to start.
Okay.
Their docs outline the model's abilities, what kind of input it expects, what output it generates, and of course, those all important rate limits.
So the docs are like instruction manuals for each model.
Yeah, pretty much.
What about the code examples we mentioned earlier? Where do those fit in?
The documentation is full of them.
Oh, nice.
They show you how to make API calls, how to handle the model's responses, and even how to implement those cool techniques like exponential backoff, all in different programming languages, including Python.
Awesome.
They're like cheat sheets for talking to the API.
That's incredibly helpful,
Yeah.
especially for visual learners like me who thrive on seeing the code in action. Do you have any specific examples in mind that would be helpful for our aspiring chatbot developer?
Absolutely. The chat completion API documentation would be a perfect starting point.
Okay.
It walks you through the process of sending a prompt to the model and receiving a response, and even has examples of how to tweak the model's behavior with different parameters.
Tweaking the model's behavior, that sounds interesting. Can you elaborate on what that means and how it works in practice?
It's called fine-tuning.
Okay.
Imagine you're coaching a sports team. You can adjust their strategies and techniques to suit particular opponent or playing style.
Right.
Similarly, you can fine-tune an OpenAI model by adjusting parameters that control things like the length of its responses, its level of creativity, and so on.
Yeah.
This allows you to tailor the model's output to your specific needs.
So if I wanted my chatbot to be more concise in its responses, I could adjust a parameter to make it give shorter answers. And if I wanted it to be more playful and imaginative, there's a parameter for that too.
It's all about experimenting and finding the sweet spot for your chatbot's personality and how you want it to interact with users.
That's really cool. It opens up so many possibilities for customizing the user experience.
Yeah.
But before we get too carried away with creative chatbot personalities,
Right.
let's circle back to rate limits. Are there any specific considerations our listeners should keep in mind when building a chatbot given these limits?
One important factor is the expected frequency of interactions with your chatbot.
Okay.
If you anticipate many users sending messages rapidly, you'll need to be mindful of the requests per minute limit.
Because each message from a user would trigger an API call, and too many calls in a short period could lead to hitting that rate limit, right?
Exactly. That's where those techniques like exponential backoff and batching can really come in handy.
Right.
They can help smooth out those API calls and ensure that your chatbot can handle a large volume of messages without running into rate limit issues.
It's like having a traffic management system for your chatbot's conversations
Yeah.
to ensure everything flows smoothly.
Precisely. And remember the dashboard we talked about earlier? That's a valuable tool for monitoring your API usage and staying informed about your rate limits. It's like checking the traffic reports before heading out on a road trip.
So to recap for our aspiring chatbot developer, Start by exploring the documentation for the GPT models.
Right.
Check out the code examples for the chat completion API.
Yeah.
Consider fine-tuning the model to suit your needs, and think strategically about those rate limits to ensure a smooth operation. Anything else they should know before we move on?
I think it's worth emphasizing that the OpenAI documentation, while incredibly comprehensive, is just the starting point. The real learning happens when you roll up your sleeves, start experimenting, and actually build things.
Right.
Don't be afraid to try new approaches. Make mistakes and learn from the process.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
It's easy to get overwhelmed by all the information, but ultimately the best way to learn is by doing.
Absolutely. Embrace the learning process and don't hesitate to seek help from the OpenAI community if you get stuck.
Right.
There are tons of resources and support available to help you along the way.
And with that, let's transition to the next stage of our exploration, now that we've laid the groundwork. I'm excited to delve into some specific examples and scenarios in the OpenAI documentation that showcase the real-world applications of this technology. All right, we've covered a lot of ground, from understanding those tricky rate limits to figuring out how to tweak a chatbot's personality. But the real magic happens when we see how this technology is being used in the real world.
Yeah.
What are some examples of OpenAI's models making a real difference?
I think one area that's really booming right now is content creation.
Okay.
Tools like ChatGPT are being used by writers, marketers, educators, you name it, to generate all kinds of content.
Wow.
From blog posts to marketing copy to even poetry.
It's like having a superpowered writing partner.
Yeah.
Who's always available to brainstorm ideas, polish your drafts, and even translate your work into different languages.
Exactly. And it's not just about text.
Right.
OpenAI's models are also making waves in image and audio creation,
Oh, wow.
leading to some truly mind-blowing advancements in fields like graphic design and music production.
Yeah. Imagine creating stunning visuals or composing original music with the help of AI. The possibilities are pretty incredible.
It's amazing to see how these models are being used to push the boundaries of creativity. But I imagine there are some challenges that come with integrating this technology into different fields. What are some of the things developers and users need to be mindful of as they explore these applications?
I think one key consideration is ensuring the responsible use of these powerful tools.
Okay.
We need to be aware of the potential impact of AI-generated content and make sure it's used ethically and transparently.
Right.
For example, if you're using an AI model to generate marketing copy, it's important to ensure that the content is accurate, unbiased, and doesn't mislead consumers.
That makes perfect sense. Transparency and responsible use are crucial as we navigate this new landscape of AI-powered tools. It's all about finding the right balance between leveraging the power of this technology and ensuring that it's used ethically and for the benefit of everyone. Absolutely. As with any powerful tool, it's our responsibility to use it wisely and consider the potential consequences. But with careful consideration and a commitment to ethical practices, AI has the potential to revolutionize countless industries and improve our lives in meaningful ways.
Well said. So as our listener embarks on their OpenAI adventure, armed with the knowledge we've shared today, what's the one key takeaway you'd want them to remember?
I'd encourage them to approach this technology with a sense of curiosity, a willingness to experiment, and a commitment to lifelong learning.
Right.
The world of AI is constantly evolving, so staying curious and engaged is crucial.
And remember, the OpenAI documentation is an incredible resource, but the real learning comes from getting your hands dirty building things and exploring the vast potential of these models.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to dive in, make mistakes, and learn from the process. The journey is just as important as the destination.
That's a great way to put it. Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into the OpenAI documentation. We've covered a lot of ground, from those essential rate limits to real-world applications and ethical considerations. We hope you found this journey informative and inspiring. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with AI.
All right, so Python people, if you're listening to this, you're probably ready to level up your Python skills. And we're going to do that by looking at some API documentation.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're going to do a deep dive into the OpenAI documentation.
Yeah, we're going to break down all the key concepts, figure out what all the technical terms mean, help you really understand the whole architecture of the API.
Yeah, so think of this deep dive as like a pre-flight check before you actually take off with OpenAI.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it.
So we'll equip you with everything you need, all the knowledge, the tools, to go from feeling like, oh my gosh, these docs are a jungle, to, okay, I can actually work with this.
That's right.
And speaking of feeling lost in the jungle, there's no better place to start than with error codes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, those cryptic messages that make you think you're doing everything wrong.
Yeah, those are fun. But, instead of getting frustrated, think of them as feedback from the API.
So instead of saying, what am I doing wrong?
Mm.
I should be asking, what's the API trying to tell me here?
Exactly. And the documentation can actually be really helpful in decoding those messages. Like, let's say you're making a bunch of requests really quickly in a row to the API, and all of a sudden you get a rate limit reached error.
Ugh, yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, so it's basically saying, hey, slow down, can't keep up.
Yeah, it's like hitting the brakes too hard.
Right, you need to ease into it. And a good way to do that is to implement what's called exponential backoff.
Exponential back off.
Yeah. It's basically like if you hit that rate limit, you wait a little bit and then you try again. And if you hit it again, you wait a little bit longer and so on and so forth.
Oh, so it's like a strategic coffee break.
That's a great way to think about it.
All right, so I'll just sip my coffee and calmly resubmit my request.
There you go.
Okay, cool. Now, what about authentication error? What does that usually mean?
Usually it means that there's a problem with your API key.
Oh, okay. So what are some strategies I can use to troubleshoot that?
So the docs actually walk you through a couple things, like double checking that you're using the correct key, making sure it's active, and verifying that you're sending it in the right format.
So basically just go through a checklist.
Right, exactly.
Make sure everything's plugged in right.
Yeah, sometimes the simplest solution is the right one, like maybe regenerate the API key, clear the browser cache, maybe even check your internet connection.
It's like checking the phone line before you make a call.
Perfect analogy.
Okay, so now let's talk about the Python library specifically. Are there errors that I might encounter that are specific to the Python library?
Yeah, that's a great question. Remember, the Python library is kind of like your toolkit for interacting with the API. It makes it way easier, especially if you're a beginner. But it has its own kind of quirks and ways of communicating with you. So yeah, there are definitely errors specific to the Python library that you might see.
Oh, okay, so if the API is speaking a foreign language, the Python library is like the translator.
Exactly.
But sometimes, even the translator needs a little help.
Yeah, you got it. So, what's an example of a Python library-specific error?
So one common one is API connection error. And basically, that just means your code couldn't connect to the OpenAI servers.
So it's like when my internet goes out.
Exactly. So same kind of troubleshooting steps. Check your internet connection, make sure your firewall isn't blocking anything, look at your proxy settings if you're using one.
Oh, okay. So it's not always my code. It could be something outside of that.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, what about AP hideout error? Does that mean the API is just like taking a coffee break?
Well, it can feel that way. But no, it just means that your request took too long to complete.
Oh, okay. So is that on my end or is that on the API's end?
It'd be either or both.
Okay.
It could be a slow internet connection on your end, or it could be a complex request that takes a while for the API to process, or there could be a lot of traffic on OpenAI servers.
So if I get a timeout error, what do I do? Just wait. The docs usually recommend trying the request again after a short pause. If it keeps happening, then you might want to investigate further. See if there's anything you can do to streamline your request or improve your connection.
Okay, so we've talked about all these errors, but how do we actually handle them in our code? How do we write code that doesn't just completely crash when one of these things happens?
That's where the beauty of error handling comes in.
Okay.
It's like a safety net for your code.
Gotcha.
And in Python, you can use try and except blocks to kind of gracefully manage those errors.
Okay, I've heard of those.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly how they work.
So basically, imagine you're asking the API a question, but you're also prepared for the possibility that it might not understand you or might not be able to answer right away.
Okay.
So the try block is like asking the question, and the accept block is your backup plan in case things go wrong.
Gotcha. So the try block is where I put the code that's actually interacting with the API. And then the accept block is where I say, okay, well, if this happens, do this instead.
Exactly. So you'd have different accept blocks for different types of errors.
Oh, okay.
One might handle an API connection error and another one might handle API connection error.
Okay, so it's like having different responses prepared for different situations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then within each accept block, you would write the code that tells your program what to do if that specific error occurs. So you could have it print a friendly error message or log the error to a file or even attempt the request again after a short delay.
That's really cool. So instead of just crashing, it can actually gracefully handle it and keep running.
Exactly. It gives you that power.
Okay, so it's starting to make sense.
Good.
So it's not about, being intimidated by the error messages. It's like, oh, okay, now I can actually use these to improve my code and actually work with the API.
Yeah, exactly. They're your friend.
Okay, so we've demystified error codes. We've even learned a little bit about how to handle them in our code. Now I feel a lot more confident about like diving into the OpenAI docs and making those API calls. But before we get into that, let's take a quick break and come back refreshed. And then we'll unlock the secrets of actually using the OpenAI API.
Okay, so we're not scared of error messages anymore.
No, we're friends with them.
That's right. Now we can actually talk about how to use the API and actually make those API calls.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready. So where do we begin? Like when I open up the documentation, what's the first thing I should be looking for?
So first thing you want to do is find the specific API endpoint for the task you're trying to accomplish. You can think of endpoints like different departments in a company.
Okay.
Each one is responsible for a specific function. Like if you want to generate text, there's a text generation endpoint. If you want to translate languages, there's an endpoint for that.
Okay, so it's like a menu of AI capabilities.
Exactly. And the documentation lists out all the available endpoints, tells you what each one does. So
Wow.
that's where you start.
Okay, so once I've found the right endpoint, what's next? How do I actually make the API call?
All right, so that's where it gets a little more
A
technical,
little bit.
but we'll break it down. Each endpoint will have instructions on how to structure your API request.
Okay.
It's like a recipe, you know?
You got to have the right ingredient.
The right ingredients in the right order. So you can't just send any random message to the API. There's a format you need to follow.
Okay, so there's like a structure to it.
Yeah, and you'll usually need to provide certain parameters in your request.
Okay.
And those are basically just pieces of information that the API needs to understand what you want it to do.
But okay, can you give me an example? Like let's say I'm using that text generation endpoint. What kind of parameters would I need to provide?
Sure, yeah. So for text generation, you definitely need to provide a prompt, which is the text that you want the AI to build upon.
So if I say once upon a time.
Exactly. It'll take that and hopefully generate a fairy tale for you.
Okay.
Or you can specify like how long you want the generated text to be, the writing style you're going for, even like how creative you want the AI to be. It's really cool.
Oh, wow. So you can really fine tune it.
You can?
Okay, cool. So the documentation also mentions API keys. What are those?
Yeah, so API keys are basically like your secret passwords for accessing the API. They identify you and they make sure that you're authorized to use the service. It's kind of like a VIP pass.
So I need to keep that safe.
Keep it safe, yeah. You don't want to share it with anyone.
Gotcha.
And usually you'll include it in the header of your API request.
Okay, so that's like a separate section that has some additional information.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. And so I've got my endpoint, I've got my parameters, I've got my API key. Then what? How do I send the request?
Right, so that's where your Python skills come in. You'll use Python libraries to send that request over the internet to OpenAI's servers.
Okay.
Like sending an email, you know. You compose your message, put the address on it, and hit send.
And then I should get a response back, hopefully.
Hopefully, if everything goes well, you get the results you wanted.
Yeah, if not, one of those error messages.
There you go, yeah.
All right. So find the endpoint, structure my request with the parameters, API key in the header, send it off using Python.
That's it.
Okay, that still sounds a bit overwhelming, though, to be honest.
Yeah, it can be a bit daunting at first, but that's where the OpenAI Python library that we mentioned earlier comes in to make things easier. You know, it's like a trusty sidekick.
Okay.
And instead of like manually crafting those API requests yourself, the Python library actually has convenient functions that do a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
Oh, okay. So it's like having someone prep all the ingredients.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, like let's say you want to use that text generation endpoint again. Instead of figuring out the exact structure of that API request, you can just use a function like openai.completion.create and provide the parameters.
And it just takes care of all the
It
details?
takes care of all the details for you, yeah.
Wow, okay. So how do I even know about these functions? Where do I find information about them?
Yeah, so the OpenAI documentation, it's your best friend here. You'll find lots of code examples showing how to use that Python library. You can often just copy and paste them and tweak them to fit what you're trying to do.
Oh, okay. So it's like giving me templates.
Exactly.
That's really helpful. So the documentation doesn't just tell me what things are, it actually shows me how to use them.
It does, yeah.
That's super helpful.
Yeah, and the more you use it, the more comfortable you'll become with everything.
All right, so we've gone from being intimidated by the documentation to understanding how to find endpoints, how to structure our requests, and now we're even using the Python library to make our lives easier.
That's right.
So let's take a quick pause, and then we'll come back and dive into some more advanced concepts and best practices. All right, so we're back. We've gone over a lot. Error codes, API calls, even using the Python library. What else is there?
Yeah, we've covered a lot of the basics, but there's still some advanced stuff, best practices that can really make you an OpenAI pro.
Okay, I'm all ears. What do you got?
So one thing that a lot of people, especially beginners, kind of overlook is rate limits. Remember we talked about the rate limit reached error?
Yeah, the API telling me to slow down.
Exactly. And every ATI has rate limits to prevent abuse and make sure that everyone has fair access. It's like a speed limit,
Oh, okay.
so everyone can have a smooth ride if we all just stay within the limits.
Yeah, that makes sense. So where do I find that information? Like, what is the speed limit for OpenAI?
Usually the documentation will tell you for each endpoint what the rate limits are.
Okay.
It might say something like, you can make a maximum of 10 requests per minute. It's really important to pay attention to those limits and build your code in a way that respects them.
Okay, so what happens if I accidentally go over the limit?
Well, you'll probably get that rate limit reached error, and your request might be temporarily blocked.
Okay.
So remember that exponential back-off technique?
Yeah, the strategic coffee break.
Exactly. So instead of just hammering the API with requests, you got to pace yourself.
Be polite. Okay, cool. Now, what about security? Like, what are some things I should keep in mind as I start building more serious applications?
Right. Yeah. Security is super important. And a big part of that is how you handle your API keys.
Those VIP passes.
Exactly. Your API key is basically like a master key to your account. So you got to treat it with care, never expose it publicly.
So don't post it on Twitter.
No, definitely not. Don't write it on a sticky note and put it on your monitor.
Nope.
The best practice is to store those securely using environment variables or like a dedicated secrets management system.
Okay, so it's like keeping it in a vault.
Exactly. So yeah, security is not just about writing good code. It's also about how you manage those sensitive credentials.
Gotcha. So before we wrap up, anything else I should know? Any other words of wisdom?
Well, just remember that the documentation is always evolving. They're constantly adding new features, updates, improvements. So it's not a static document.
So it's like a living, breathing guide.
It is, yeah. Make it a habit to check for new releases and announcements. You might find, some cool new capability or a better way of doing something you're already doing.
Okay, so stay up to date. Like,
Yeah.
make sure I'm using the latest and greatest stuff.
Exactly. The more you stay engaged with the docs, the more you'll get out of the OpenAI API.
Cool. Well, this has been really helpful. Honestly, like, I came in feeling a little bit intimidated by those docs, but now I feel like, okay, I can do this. I've got a resource I can use.
That's great. That's what we wanted.
So big thanks to you for sharing your knowledge and walking us through everything.
Happy to help. Keep coding.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you feel a little bit more confident about tackling those docs and building amazing AI-powered applications. Keep learning, keep exploring, and until next time, happy coding, everyone. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving into a world that most Python beginners find a little intimidating. It's the OpenAI documentation.
Yeah, it can seem that way.
Like this huge cookbook
It is like a cookbook, yeah.
with all these amazing recipes for AI projects,
Right.
but sometimes it feels like those recipes are in a foreign language.
Sometimes they do.
So for all of you out there
Mm-hmm.
with about 3 months of Python experience who are eager to build some really cool stuff with AI,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to break down this OpenAI documentation in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're building a mental roadmap before we even open the first page.
It is.
Yeah.
It's kind of like learning a new city, right? You wouldn't
Yeah.
just wander around aimlessly. You'd
Mhm.
want a map to help you find the landmarks, the
Yeah.
shortcuts and the hidden gems.
Okay, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So let's start with one of the first things that might trip you up in the documentation,
Yeah.
all those model names
Right.
and versions.
Yep.
You got GPT 3.5, GPT 4, and then things like GPT 4.0613.
Yeah, what's the story there? What does that all mean?
What is the story there?
So those names actually tell us a lot.
Okay.
The base name, like GPT 3.5 or GPT 4, that points to the model family.
Okay.
Think of it like different generations of the same technology.
Right.
Then you have that date-based suffix like 0613,
Okay.
which pinpoints the specific version that was released on June 13th in that case.
So GPT 4.0613
Yeah,
is a specific version of GPT 4 released on June 13th.
exactly.
It's very specific.
Why is it so important to know which version you're working with?
Because OpenAI is constantly making improvements.
Right.
As they roll out new versions, Older ones might get flagged as deprecated,
Uh-huh.
meaning they'll eventually be shut down.
Okay.
And that can really impact your projects if you're not prepared.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think deprecation and legacy
Yes.
are two terms that confuse even experienced developers sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
What's the difference?
You think of deprecation as a heads up.
OpenAI is saying, hey, this model is on its way out. They'll give you a clear shutdown date so you can migrate to a newer version before your project breaks.
Right.
Legacy means the model is still around,
Okay.
but it's no longer getting updates.
Okay.
It's like that old phone.
Right.
That still works,
Right.
but it doesn't get the latest software.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
So legacy models are still functional,
Yes.
but it's a signal to start planning your move to something newer.
Yeah, you should start thinking about moving.
Okay, but why would OpenAI deprecate a model in the first place?
That's a good question.
It seems like they're always coming out with something new.
They are.
Right.
OpenAI's mission is to create increasingly safe, capable, and aligned AI models.
Uh-huh.
As they make progress, older models become less relevant
Okay.
and may even pose potential risks.
Gotcha.
Deprecation ensures that everyone benefits from the latest advancements
Right.
while also managing those risks responsibly.
So it's like they're constantly raising the bar.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, so let's say I'm browsing the documentation.
Yep.
And I see a model marked as deprecated.
Yeah.
What should I do next?
Well, the first thing is to find the shutdown date
Okay.
and check if it affects your timeline.
Gotcha.
Then OpenAI usually recommends replacement models.
Okay.
So look for those.
Yeah.
They want to make the transition as smooth as possible.
Okay.
And they provide tools to help you evaluate how a new model might impact your existing work.
So they've got our back.
They do.
Okay. But where do I find all this information in the actual documentation?
Right.
It can feel like a maze sometimes.
There's a dedicated deprecations section
Okay.
that lays it all out, shutdown dates, replacement recommendations,
Right.
you name it.
Gotcha.
They also have a blog where they announce big changes and updates.
Okay, so those are the two spots to keep an eye on.
Exactly.
Now, let's say I want to dive deeper into a specific model,
Mm-hmm.
like GPT-4.
Okay.
What's the best way to navigate to that information?
The documentation is organized really well. You'll find sections for each major model family, like GPT-3, GPT-3.5, and GPT-4.
Okay.
Just click on the one you're interested in, and you'll be taken to a page with everything you need to know.
Okay, so it's pretty straightforward.
Very straightforward.
What kind of details should I be paying attention to once I'm in the GPT-4 section, for example?
Okay.
What's going to be most relevant to me as I'm getting started?
You'll see information about its capabilities,
Okay.
its limitations, how to use it.
Uh-huh.
Pay close attention to the context window,
Okay.
which is how much text the model can process at once.
Gotcha.
You'll also want to understand the parameters.
Mm-hmm.
These are like settings you can tweak
Okay.
when interacting with the API.
Parameters, like what?
Sure.
Can you give me an example?
Let's say you want to play with the model's creativity.
Yeah.
There's a parameter called temperature that you can adjust.
Okay.
Higher temperature means more unexpected and creative outputs, while lower temperature keeps things more predictable.
Interesting. So it's like a dial for controlling the AI's wild side.
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
What about those endpoints I hear people talking about?
Yes.
What are those all about?
Endpoints are specific URLs you use to interact with different parts of the API.
Okay.
Think of them like different doors leading to different rooms within a larger house.
So if I want to generate text,
Yeah,
I'd use a different endpoint than if I wanted to, say, translate languages.
exactly.
Okay.
Each endpoint has its own purpose
Okay.
and a set of instructions for how to use it effectively.
Okay.
You'll find all those details clearly laid out in the documentation.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so we started to decode this OpenAI documentation map,
Right.
and we're getting a feel for the landscape.
Yes.
But let's talk about something that is crucial
Okay.
for actually using the API,
Mm-hmm.
those mysterious API keys.
Ah, yes, the keys to the kingdom.
Exactly.
They give you access to all that AI power.
But where do you even find these keys?
Okay.
And what do you do with them? I remember feeling pretty lost when I first started out.
Yeah, it can be a little confusing at first,
Yeah.
but it's actually really simple.
Okay.
You just head to your OpenAI account dashboard,
Okay.
and there's a section specifically for API keys.
Mm-hmm.
You can generate a new key with a click,
Okay.
but here's the catch.
Okay.
Treat your API key like gold.
What do you mean?
Don't share it publicly.
Okay.
Don't hard code it directly into your applications.
It's just a key, right?
It's more like a master key to your OpenAI account.
Okay.
If someone gets hold of it,
Yeah.
they can make API calls on your behalf,
Uh-oh.
potentially running up charges
Right.
or even causing security issues.
So it's a good point.
Yeah, so you got to keep it safe.
So where should you keep it safe?
A good practice is to store it in a separate environment file
Okay.
or use a secrets manager.
Gotcha.
That way it's protected.
Right.
And easily accessible to your applications without compromising security.
Got it. Security first.
Yes.
Okay, now let's talk about another thing that trips up a lot of beginners.
Yeah.
Myself included.
Okay.
Errors.
Oh, yeah.
Let's be honest.
Right.
When you're coding,
Yeah.
things don't always go as planned.
That's part of the process.
Right.
Errors are part of the journey.
Yeah.
What separates good developers from great ones is knowing how to handle them gracefully.
And does the OpenAI documentation help with that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The documentation provides a roadmap
Okay.
for navigating those bumps in the road.
Yeah.
It breaks down the different types of errors you might encounter,
Okay.
like exceeding rate limits,
Okay.
making invalid requests, or even running into server issues on their end.
So it's like a troubleshooting guide
Yes, it is.
built right in to the
Yes.
documentation.
It explains error codes, messages, and common troubleshooting steps.
Ah.
It even offers tips on structuring your code to handle those errors effectively.
Can you give us an example of what that looks like?
Sure.
Okay.
One common practice is using try-except blocks in your Python code.
Okay.
Think of it as setting up a safety net.
Okay.
You try to execute a piece of code,
Mm-hmm.
and if it fails,
Yeah.
the except block catches the error
Okay.
and lets you handle it gracefully.
So instead of crashing the entire program,
Right.
you could display a helpful message to the user
Exactly.
or log the error for later analysis.
Yeah.
Or maybe even retry the operation.
It's all about building resilience into your code.
Okay.
And the OpenAI documentation gives you the knowledge to do that effectively.
So we've talked about API keys.
Mhm.
We talked about error handling
Right.
and how the documentation has our back.
It does.
But OpenAI is always evolving.
Constantly.
So how can Python beginners stay up to date with the latest and greatest?
So first, subscribe to the OpenAI blog
Okay.
and follow their social media. They're constantly announcing new releases, updates, and interesting use cases.
Mm-hmm.
It's like getting a direct line to the source.
I love that.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Don't underestimate the power of community.
Good.
Join the OpenAI Developer Forum.
Okay.
It's a place where developers of all skill levels
Mm-hmm.
share experiences, ask questions, and help each other out.
Right.
It's a great way to learn from others who are on the same journey as you.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
Speaking of journeys,
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier
Yeah.
some historical quirks of the OpenAI API.
Right.
Like the engines they used to have.
Yes.
I remember being so confused by those names.
Yeah.
Da Vinci, Curie, Babbage, Ada.
It sounds like a history book.
It does.
It's fascinating to see how the API has evolved.
It totally is.
Those engines were powerful for their time,
Yeah.
each with its strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
Da Vinci was the workhorse for complex tasks.
Oh, yep.
Curie was faster and more cost-effective,
Uh-huh.
while Babbage and Ada had more specialized roles.
So why did they switch from engines to models?
This shift actually reflects a broader trend in AI.
Okay.
Early on, the focus was on building these giant general-purpose AI engines
Let's go.
that could do it all.
One-size-fits-all AI?
Exactly.
Okay.
But over time, the focus shifted towards specialization.
Okay.
Researchers realized that it was more effective to create models tailored to specific tasks. That's why we now have a whole ecosystem of specialized models,
Okay.
each optimized for things like text generation, image creation, or code writing.
It makes sense.
Yeah,
Specialization leads to better performance
it does.
and more focused results.
Right.
And OpenAI is always at the forefront of those advancements.
Absolutely. They're lead in the way.
And if you ever come across older documentation
Yeah.
or tutorials mentioning engines,
Right.
you'll know they're referring to that earlier stage of the API.
Exactly.
Good to know.
Yeah.
But speaking of older documentation,
Yeah.
let's talk about something specifically designed to help beginners. Those code examples sprinkled throughout the OpenAI documentation.
Yes, those are great.
They were like lifesavers for me when I was starting out.
They can be really helpful.
Yeah,
Code examples are a fantastic way to learn by doing.
they are.
You see exactly how to implement different functionalities using Python,
Yes.
making it so much easier to get started.
It's like having a cheat sheet,
It is.
but in the best way possible.
Yeah, exactly.
You can copy and paste the code,
Yeah.
tinker with it,
Mm-hmm.
and see how it works.
It takes away the fear of starting from scratch.
It really does.
Yeah.
But Are there any pitfalls beginners should watch out for when using those code examples?
So one common mistake is forgetting to replace the placeholder API key in the example code with your actual key.
Right.
Seems obvious,
Yeah.
but it's easy to overlook
Yeah.
and can lead to frustrating errors.
Always double check those API keys.
Oh,
Any other tips?
pay attention to the input and output formats.
Oh.
Make sure your code is sending data in the format the model expects.
Okay.
If you're sending text to an image model,
Yeah.
you're going to get some strange results.
Right.
And always test your code thoroughly.
Right.
Don't be afraid to break things and see what happens.
Yes.
It's part of the learning process.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
We've demystified API keys, learned about error handling,
Yeah.
and even delved into some OpenAI history.
A little bit.
But there's one more resource
Okay.
that's like a hidden treasure for Python beginners.
Oh, what's that?
The OpenAI Cookbook.
Ah, the cookbook. Yes.
I love that name.
It's a good one.
So what kind of recipes can we find in this AI cookbook?
It has a curated set of code examples, tutorials, and best practices for using OpenAI models for specific tasks.
Okay.
Things like building chatbots,
Oh.
classifying text,
And
or even generating creative content like poems or stories.
the best part is
Yeah,
that it's designed for beginners.
it is.
You don't need a PhD in AI
Right.
to understand and use the examples.
It's all about practicality and accessibility.
Exactly.
The cookbook is constantly updated with new examples and techniques,
Okay.
so you're always learning the latest and greatest.
So if you're looking for a more hands-on guided approach
Yeah.
to learning OpenAI, definitely check out the cookbook.
Yes, definitely.
It's a fantastic resource.
It is.
And for those who want to play around with AI
Yeah.
before diving into code,
Right.
there's the OpenAI Playground.
The playground, yes.
I remember spending hours in there when I first started out.
It's fun.
It's like a sandbox for experimenting with AI without writing any code.
Exactly.
You can interact with the models in real time.
Yeah.
Try different prompts,
Mm.
tweak parameters, and see how the AI responds.
It's a great way to get a feel for the different models and what they're capable of.
So if you're feeling a little intimidated by code,
Yeah,
the Playground is a great place to start.
absolutely.
It's a fun and engaging way to learn.
It is all about exploration and discovery.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We've explored the OpenAI documentation map, we've gathered our tools,
Right.
and now it's time to level up our AI skills.
Yeah, let's do it.
In this final part, we're going beyond the basics
Okay.
to uncover some advanced techniques
Right.
and best practices. Think of it as going from following recipes
Okay. Yeah.
to creating your own culinary masterpieces.
I like that.
We're going to give you the techniques and insights
Yeah.
to build truly exceptional AI applications.
Awesome.
So let's start with something that sounds a bit like magic.
Okay.
Prompt engineering.
Oh, yeah.
What exactly is that,
Right.
and why is it so important?
So prompt engineering is the art of crafting effective prompts to guide the AI
Okay.
and get the results that you're looking for.
Okay.
It's like giving the AI clear instructions
Okay.
and setting the stage for it to perform its best.
So it's not just about telling the AI what to do.
Right.
It's about how you tell it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The way you phrase your prompt
Mm-hmm.
can significantly impact the quality, the relevance, and the creativity of the AI's output.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Okay.
Imagine you're using GPT-3 to generate a story.
Okay.
If you simply prompt it with, write a story, you'll probably get something generic and predictable.
Right.
But if you give it more context, like write a science fiction story about a time traveler who visits a futuristic city,
Okay.
you're guiding the AI towards a more specific and engaging narrative.
So it's about setting the scene
Yeah,
and giving the AI a framework to work within.
precisely.
Oh, yeah.
The OpenAI documentation provides a wealth of information
Okay.
on prompt engineering techniques, along with practical examples
Okay.
to help you master this art.
So it's definitely worth diving into those resources
It is,
if you want to level up your prompt game.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about another advanced technique,
Oh.
fine-tuning.
Yes.
We touched on this briefly before.
But I'd love to explore it further.
Okay.
What's the big deal with fine-tuning?
Right.
And how does it work?
Fine-tuning is like taking a pre-trained AI model
Okay.
with all of its existing knowledge and capabilities
Mhm.
and customizing it for a specific task.
Okay.
It's like taking a Swiss Army knife
Oh,
and
but-
sharpening one of its blades for a very particular job.
So instead of building a model from scratch,
Right.
you're taking something that's already pretty powerful
Yeah,
and making it even more specialized.
exactly.
Wow.
Let's say you want to create a chatbot
Okay.
that specializes in answering customer questions about your company's products.
Okay.
You could fine-tune one of OpenAI's language models
Hmm.
using a data set of customer conversations and product documentation.
So you're essentially training the AI
Yeah,
to be an expert in your specific domain.
precisely.
Okay.
And this approach saves you a lot of time and effort
Right.
compared to building a model from the ground up. Plus, a fine-tuned model is likely to be much more accurate and relevant for your specific needs.
So fine-tuning is like giving the AI a crash course
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
in your particular subject matter.
Yeah.
Now let's shift gears and talk about some best practices
Okay.
for working with the OpenAI API.
Mm-hmm.
I know we talked about error handling before,
Right.
but I think it's worth revisiting,
Okay.
especially in the context of building more complex applications.
Absolutely.
So what are some tips
Okay.
for handling errors effectively,
Right.
especially when working with the OpenAI API?
Those try except blocks we talked about earlier
Yeah.
are your best friend.
Okay.
They allow you to anticipate potential problems
Uh-huh.
and handle them gracefully.
Right.
For example, if an API request fails,
Yeah.
you can catch the error
Mm-hmm.
and display a user-friendly message
Right.
instead of crashing the entire program.
So it's all about creating a smooth experience,
Yes.
even when things go wrong behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Any other best practices to keep in mind?
Keep a close eye on your API usage.
Okay.
OpenAI has rate limits
Uh-huh.
to prevent abuse and ensure everyone has fair access.
Okay.
If you exceed those limits,
Yeah.
your requests might get delayed or even rejected.
So it's important to be mindful of how much you're using the API
Right.
and to build in mechanisms to handle rate limit errors gracefully.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about something that's often overlooked,
Okay.
but incredibly important.
What's that?
The user experience.
Ah, yes.
When you're building AI applications,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about the technology.
Right.
It's about how real people will interact with your creation.
It's about making the AI accessible
Yes.
and enjoyable to use.
A well-designed AI application
Yeah.
should be intuitive,
Mm-hmm.
user-friendly,
Right.
and provide a seamless experience.
Exactly.
Think clear instructions,
Yeah.
helpful feedback,
Uh-huh.
and user-friendly error messages.
So something goes wrong. Instead of just displaying a cryptic error code,
Yeah.
you want to guide the user towards a solution.
Exactly. Always keep the human on the other side of the screen in mind.
Yes, always.
Their experience matters just as much as the technology itself.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From navigating the OpenAI documentation
Mm-hmm.
to understanding advanced techniques and best practices.
Right.
But before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I want to emphasize one more thing.
Okay.
The importance of continuous learning.
Yes.
The world of AI is constantly evolving.
It is always changing.
There's always something new to discover,
Right.
a new model to explore,
Yeah.
a new technique to master.
Absolutely.
So don't be afraid to experiment,
Yeah.
push boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
and never stop learning.
Never stop learning.
The OpenAI documentation is a fantastic starting point,
It is a great resource.
but it's just the beginning of your AI journey.
the beginning of the journey.
Embrace the journey.
Yeah.
And remember to have fun along the way.
Have fun.
And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the OpenAI documentation.
It's been a good one.
We hope you feel empowered to explore this incredible world
Yeah.
and build amazing things with AI.
Awesome.
Happy coding, everyone.
Happy coding.